My name is Lucy Walker. The good Lord let me live long enough to see many things, some sorrows and some good times. I lived to see my 83rd birthday. I was 21 years old when John Brown raided Harper's Ferry, and I was sitting right here during the Battle of Cedar Creek. So I ain't no spring chicken no more. Yet even today, I can do just as much work as my grandchildren. I've been strong and healthy all my life. During the Civil War, I lived and worked right here at Belle Grove. I was employed by Mrs. Rebecca Gorden. Rebecca and I became close friends over the years. We would share happy times and we consoled each other through sad ones. What I'm about to tell you is what life was like in them days. I was born in 1843 on a farm in Berryville, Virginia. I was born a slave. My pa's name was Lewis Robinson. He was born free, and so was the rest of his kin. They lived right here in Middletown. My pa was a very industrious man. He earned his way by working the fields. My mother's name was Hester. She was a slave. Her pappy be her old massa. She was sold from us when I was just 2 years old. I don't remember her at all. All my life I think about her. I pray that she be safe and that the good Lord watched over her. I figure she be praying for me too. Pa say that mother was a beautiful woman with long raven hair and delicate features. He say she be what they call a quadroon. She was very fair. Young massa was her half-brother. He was right mean to her. One day, young massa decided that a beautiful young quadroon was a waste of a valuable commodity. 'Cause round here, a quadroon was nothing but a slave. But in New Orleans, a quadroon would fetch young massa a very handsome price. He sold her to a notorious slave broker from New Orleans by the name of Thomas Boudard. He took mother to Richmond and put her on a ship called the Parthenon, bound for New Orleans. We never seen or heard from mother again. Sometimes thinking about it makes me sad, too sad. The law say if the mother slave, so is the churn. My pa purchased my freedom when I was very young. I was bound though, but I was free. What it mean to be bound is that I work on a place for a time, then I go somewhere else. Most of the time I just work for food and shelter, but every now and then I'd get paid a little something. To tell you the truth, in them days round here, there wasn't much difference between a free colored man or a slave. I never met a colored man, slave or free, who didn't call his employer boss or massa. Being free meant that the danger of being snatched up by the paddy rollers always haunted our thoughts. The paddy rollers were privateers that hunted fugitive slaves. The paddy rollers also had a notoriety of snatching up free colored folks. By law, free colored folks who didn't have anyone to vouch for their work were considered vagrants, were snatched up, and would be sold to some God-forsaken place down south. By 1860, right here in Middletown, there were many colored families that were free. Some lived with the families they worked for, like I did, and some were day laborers, and they came home every evening to their families. There was a lot of restrictions on what free colored folk could do back in them days. There was a curfew at sundown, and we weren't allowed to congregate in groups more than 10, so we went to church with the white folks. We had our own section. Although there were a great many restrictions imposed on us, we could, however, own property. And since Middletown was such a small hamlet, not big enough to have a colored section of town, we lived right next door to our white neighbors. In 1806, to halt the ever-growing population of free colored folks, Virginia passed a law that newly emancipated slaves had to immediately leave the state. However, slaves set free before then could remain. Most of Middletown's free colored residents were descendants of those previously emancipated slaves. There was the Robinsons, that's my kinfolk, and the Robesons. Their young son James worked right here on this farm. There was the Spencers, the Johnsons, the Jenkins, the Colemans. There was Fanny Adams and her churn, and old Nancy Bland. There was John Noakes and James Nickens, Rachel Hewlett, the Taylors, Joseph Baker, and Philip Wormley. There was Susanna Thompson. She worked here at Belle Grove. She was about 14 then, and she helped me right here in this kitchen. There was Robert Dixon and Elizabeth Gum. There was little Nancy and William Brown. They were orphans. Their mother passed away, so they were bound on a place until they were of age. There was Frank Lupton, Hannah Sprout, Eliza Smith and her young'uns, the William family, the Wells, Franklin Lee, the Newmans, Benjamin Howard, Charles Anderson, and Eliza Garrett. She worked for a time for Philip Height and his family. Although some of our kin went up north to Pittsburgh, most of us stayed. Middletown was our home. From the rolling landscape of hill and dale to the majestic mountains that stood tall in the backdrop, and Cedar Creek with its crystal cool waters. We figured Middletown was as good as any place to be free. We were all aware of the atrocities that occurred throughout the South, and we sure wasn't exempt from it. We too were subject to the temperaments and abuses of our employers. When I was about 13, I went about working as a domestic. I hung the washing, I did the mending, spin the wool, keep the house, and mind the children. Most of the time, I was treated decent enough. By that I mean I never got whipped. I was treated well, as one would treat their horse or their dog or their pig. After old Miss Height passed away in 1851, the Coolies moved here to Belle Grove and worked this land as tenant farmers for several years before they actually bought the place. Pa and I came here to work shortly after them. Now, Rebecca was the matron of Belle Grove. She was Massa Cooley's sister. She always thought that buying this place was a huge mistake. She went on and on about how the house had been run down for years, the cost of repairs, and all the work it would take to keep a plantation this size going. She'd lament that once upon a time it took over 100 slaves to maintain the wheat crops, general store, distilleries, the grist mills, sawmills, gardens, orchards, smokehouse, livestock, stables, and let alone the big house. But much to her despair, she was just a woman, and the menfolk paid no attention to what she had to say. Back in them days, I was scared most to death around white folks. Some of the mistresses I had worked for was right mean. I'd barely speak above a whisper, and my trust sure didn't come easy. However, Rebecca was very kind to me, and over time I allowed myself to breathe. I felt like a human being around her, not like some scared animal all the time. Although I responded to Rebecca's kindness with the same friendliness that she showed me, I never allowed myself to forget the fragility of my circumstance and how easy things could change. Massa Cooley often lamented that his sister's political views were too extreme to be a proper Southern lady. Rebecca was unconventional, to say the least. She rode her horse like a man. I never seen her ride side saddle. And she worked just as hard as any man. And she was a good shot, too. When John Brown raided Harper's Ferry, the revolution was over before it even got started. We didn't hear about nothing till John Brown was captured. I tell you, the white folks around here was scared most to death, thinking that we were going to turn on them or something. Oh, they didn't realize how afraid we was all the time. We was afraid of Massa, afraid of his missus, afraid of his little children, afraid of being whipped, afraid of being strung up, afraid of being sold. If you was hungry, you couldn't go in Massa's garden and pick his cabbage or eat a plum hanging off his tree. If you did and he saw you, you get whipped. And after John Brown was hung, we was even afraid of freedom. Much to everyone's surprise, John Brown's execution made him a martyr among the abolitionists in this area. And around that time, slaves was running away right and left, oftentimes entire families. The slave owners figured that this had to be the work of the abolitionists in the area, and the loss of human chattel sent the slave owners into an uproar. Some say that this very house was a stop on the Underground Railroad. It was only a 10-day journey from here to Pennsylvania. With all that was going on, the slave owners formed themselves a militia. There was more whippings and stricter rules on the place than before. The old colored folks say there hadn't been this kind of fear and dread since them old Nat Turner days. One day, one of our neighbors, Mr. McLeod, stormed over here in an uproar. He accused Rebecca of helping a good number of his slaves run off. Rebecca had a reputation. She was very vocal about the evils of slavery, and she did not hide her disdain for the slave-owning class. Massa Cooley was outraged with his sister. He demanded that Rebecca recompense Mr. McLeod for his loss. He even threatened to put her in a madhouse. But Massa James, Rebecca's husband, defended her and said, "My wife is perfectly sane. She is no abolitionist." Oh, but I knew it was her. The night before the slaves run away, I was saying goodnight to some folks down here in the bottoms where the slave quarters was. While I was walking back to my cabin, I saw Rebecca, but she didn't see me. She was heading towards the woods carrying some blankets and such. I said to myself, I wonder what she doing out this time of night. I didn't think nothing of it though. She was always nursing on the slaves who was sick on a place. So I kept right on to my cabin and went to bed. The next day, Big George and his entire family was gone. She helped them get away. I admired her for what she did. I always say that you can't trust a person who don't have their own share of misery, and she sure had hers. In the evenings, Rebecca and I would take a stroll about this place. We'd walk and talk for hours. Well, she'd do most of the talking and I would do most of the listening. She'd be talking about everything, her hopes and dreams, her churn, things she wanted to see, places she wanted to go, and how because she was a woman, her point of view was always dismissed. We talk about what the good books say and how if she had the power, she would put an end to slavery. Until then, she vowed to do whatever she could do to make things right. In the evenings, after I finished my work in the kitchen, we would sit here and she would teach me how to read and write. I never asked her about her secret meetings and the things she did to help slaves escape their miseries. I just prayed for her, and I prayed that she never got caught. On one of our strolls, Rebecca turned to me and said, "Lucy, you're going to have to stop calling me ma'am. You make me sound like some old slave mistress. Call me Rebecca, like all my friends do." With much hesitation, I say, "I can't do that, ma'am. It ain't proper. If anyone heard me be too familiar with you, I could get whipped. They think I don't know my place." At that point in our conversation, Rebecca and I stopped in front of the big house. Massa Cooler was on the porch, sitting in his rocking chair, smoking his pipe. Rebecca ascended the steps and cleared her throat to get Massa Cooler's attention. As she prepared to speak, I gasped and hung my head in shame. I thought to myself, "Oh Lord, she about to get both of us whipped." Rebecca continued, "Brother, you know Lucy here. She is my very valued employee and friend. And Lucy has all the rights and privileges of familiarity as a member of my family. And if you don't like it, you can go pound sand." Massa Cooley looked like he could spit. One evening after supper, Rebecca come to my cabin with a whole heap of dresses that she could no longer fit after having her churn. She laid the dresses across my bed and said, "Try these on." I tried on each one. Looking me up and down, Rebecca say, "We're going to have to take these up in the waist so they fit better." I say, "Rebecca, all these dresses are so nice. They too nice. I can't accept these." Rebecca say, "Why shouldn't you have nice things, Lucy? You're my friend. I can't have you walking around here in rags." Since James doesn't give me much of an allowance, this is just my small way of saying how much I appreciate all that you do around here. If you don't take them, the moths are going to eat right through them. I admired myself in the looking glass, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a woman. I had work dresses, Sunday dresses, and dresses just for strolling. I had nice shoes, and I even had a winter coat and a matching bonnet. Sometimes when Rebecca and I be out strolling, I would catch the eye of one of the field hands, Frank Walker. He be a strong, handsome man. I always knew that sweet man would one day be my husband. By the spring of 1860, the rumors of an impending war spread throughout the valley. Many of the merchants and farmers sold their land and businesses and moved elsewhere. I would see caravans of covered wagons along the road. Some were going west, some were going north, some were going down south. Some came back after the war, and some never returned. Once the war started, some folks went refugeeing up in the mountains and what is now known as Blue Ridge Parkway. Some of them families stayed up in them mountains for decades. On April 17th, 1861, following the attack on Fort Sumter, Virginia seceded from the Union. The next month, Massa James, Rebecca's husband, enlisted in the Confederate Army's 4th Regiment. We had a great big send-off for our local troops right here at Belle Grove. This place sure was a sight to see that day. The fiddlers played the Virginia reel as ladies dressed in their finest twirled around like buttercups. Confident Southern soldiers dressed in their uniforms smoked cigars and praised old Jeff Davis, bragging about how General Robert E. Lee was going to whip them Yankees. A week or so after the festivities, Massa James left for camp. Now, Rebecca would often have these premonitions. The Lord would often show her things in her dreams. Most of the time, those dreams come true. Early one morning, we were all outside to see Massa James off. Rebecca was in a bad way. She come out the house wearing just her night clothes. She cried, "James, don't go. You'll be killed. I seen it." We all looked away as if we were intruding. "Please, James," she pleaded, "I beg you, think of your children. They need you. I need you." Massa James' eyes was full of worry. "Rebecca, I must do my duty," he tried to explain. Hysterical by then, Rebecca slumped down to the ground in tears, as one would mourn in sackcloth and ashes. Massa James bid for me to take Rebecca inside. After saying farewell to everyone, he rode off in his carriage. That's the last time we would see him. And I helped Rebecca to her bed, and I waited with my friend until her sorrows passed. Rebecca's premonitions of her husband's death came true. He died in March 1862. There had been an outbreak of dysentery in the camp, and Massa James didn't survive. For many months, my friend was inconsolable. Yet, when it was time, Rebecca girded herself and resumed being a very capable matron of Belle Grove. By 1863, the Union Army had established blockades on all southern ports. There was absolutely nothing to be had. We relied on whatever we could grow for sustenance. There was only a handful of folks on this plantation, about 8 adults and a bunch of children. We ran around here like mice on a wheel. We could never catch up on our work. It was all so overwhelming. The men worked in the fields from sunup to sundown. Rebecca did all the housekeeping of the rooms upstairs and all the washing for the family. Me and Sally, a slave woman, took turns about doing all the cooking and everything else that needed doing. Young Susanna was a big help to us. Even the little children had their chores. There was not an idle hand on this plantation. Sometimes I would be in this kitchen morning, noon, and night. I'd wake up before the rooster just so that I could make biscuits and gravy before the men went out to the fields. During planting season, I'd drop corn behind the men plowing, and we all pitched in during harvesting. And when the holidays came, I put in more time making butter and cakes and such. As hard as we worked round here, this place never had enough hands for it to thrive. This valley held a very strategic importance due to its proximity to the nation's capital. Confederate General Jubal Early's initial victories bolstered his confidence in the valley. Like most of the men gone off to war, there was only a few old ones and women and children left on a place throughout the entire South. Both the rebels and the Yankees shared the same faults and virtues. They were equally brazen, and both sides went about taking and destroying things as they pleased. They would come right into this house and take victuals and flour and everything. We didn't interfere with them because we were scared. and was glad that they just took the things and did no further harm to us. Rebecca had packed up all the silver and her most precious things and gave them to some kinfolk who went refuging up in the mountains till after the war. So whatever they took were things she didn't mind parting with. We raised just enough vegetables, wheat and corn to keep ourselves going. Sometimes we've had plenty, and other times the soldiers would clear up everything we had grown. By the grace of the Lord, we was able to keep our team of mules for plowing and 2 milk cows. We hid the chickens and the pigs down here. The smell down here was most awful, but we did what we had to do. We were right thrifty. We foraged, canned, pickled, preserved, dried, milled, salted, and fermented everything that we could eat. We didn't starve come winter. We became very clever in hiding things. We hid the mason jars where the soldiers wouldn't find them. And we used to have a team of horses to help, but the Yankees, they came along and took them. When the emancipation came on January 1st, 1863, Massa Cooley didn't say a word. He owned Sally and her children and 2 more slaves. He wasn't about to let them go. Other slave owners in the area shared the same sentiment. Unaware of their newfound freedom, many slaves around here just went on working like nothing ever happened. One evening when us colored folks was down here in the kitchen eating our supper, Rebecca come busting through the door, all excited about the emancipation. She told us that we should all pack up our things, get our family, and go up north. And we all thought about it. We all agreed that we would certainly leave this place, but not until the fighting ceased and the war was over. In the summer of 1864, General Ulysses S. Grant gave General Philip Sheridan the command of the Union Army in the Shenandoah Valley. Within months, Sheridan and his cavalry would drive rebel forces from the valley, ensuring the defeat of the Confederacy. That same summer, the Union Army commandeered Belle Grove. It came as sort of a relief. The soldiers had troubled us a good deal before Sheridan got here. Massa Cooley had been away for a few days handling some business, and there was a knock at the door. Rebecca answered. "May I help you, sir?" she said. "Greetings, ma'am. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Cornelius Tolles, Chief Quartermaster of the 1st Cavalry of the Union Army under the command of General Philip Sheridan." "Pleased to meet you, sir," Rebecca replied. "I am Mrs. Rebecca Cooley Gorden. I'm the matron of this home. How may I be of assistance, sir?" The colonel lowered his hat. "Ma'am, I hereby inform you that this property has been requisitioned by the United States government to serve as the headquarters for the Union Army under the command of General Sheridan. Do you have any objections to this arrangement?" "Do I have a choice in the matter?" Rebecca inquired. "No, ma'am, that would not be in your best interest." "Well, Colonel," Rebecca said, "let me show you the General's accommodations. Sometimes I think that it was God's providence that brought General Sheridan here to Belle Grove. Because Belle Grove had served as the General's headquarters, this place was spared the fate of many Southern estates that had been reduced to ashes. When Sheridan's army marched on to Belle Grove, it looked right frightful. There were soldiers, wagons, horses, and tents as far as the eye could see. The general and his officers were in and out of the big house all the time. There were some 32,000 soldiers camped here. At the sight of them all, I knew that I was witnessing something great. General Phil Sheridan was a short man and very young. I used to see him all the time. Whenever he marched out with his men, he would wave his hat to his troops and shout, "The cavalry!" It all gave me goosebumps when I thought about it, that this army was here to fight for me and everyone that looked like me, because they were compelled by their convictions that all men were created equal. There were 2 soldiers who were part of the Union Army who were camped here at Belle Grove that shared those same convictions. Those 2 men were Rutherford B. Hayes and William McKinley. They would go on to become presidents of the United States. My pa and I lived in a 2-story log cabin right here in this yard. We had some soldiers staying with us that moved into the loft of our cabin. In fact, just about every home in town had a soldier or 2 bunk there. We had no privacy. Our lives were greatly disrupted, and don't even ask how we adjusted. We all knew that at this moment in time, life wasn't about normalcy. We knew that we were a part of history. I'd often bake bread and did the washing for the soldiers, and they'd pay me. And when we found time, Rebecca and I would take our evening strolls and discuss all the excitement that was going on. On October 19, 1864, General Jubal Early executed a skillfully planned attack here at Belle Grove just before dawn. Yankee soldiers burst into our cabin, waking up the soldiers who were sleeping there, and we all bounced up. The soldiers rolled out in a hurry. I looked out the door. It was still dark. Heavy fog hung low over the valley. It was much too late to take shelter at the big house. The fighting began about daylight. Pa and I kept far back in our cabin, and we sat there, not knowing when we'd be killed. The cannons was as loud as thunder. Our little cabin shook with each blast. I thought that the whole place was gonna crumble. I peeked out the window and saw the rebels whipping the Yankees, pushing them across the field past the big house. I guess I was shell-shocked or crazy or something. I'd run and look out the door, then run back inside. What I saw was frightful. Men laying on the ground with their insides coming out, screaming and hollering. It was a shame to see men all shot up to pieces. It was the most dreadful thing I ever saw. Pa and I waited until the fighting stopped before we opened the door again and went out. The tents that had been in the yard were all gone. Men was laying all over the fields every which way, some of them with their arms and legs blown off. Rebecca was already out on the field tending to the wounded. I saw Jubal Early ride across this field on his stallion. He and his officer surveyed their victory. As old Jubal and his officers rode away, even the horses seemed to gallop valiantly off the battlefield, as if they knew the rebels had been victorious. With the officers gone, hungry rebel soldiers began to plunder the Union camp, scarfing down whatever they could find to eat. The rebels relaxed a bit and celebrated their victory, which allowed time for the Yankees to regroup. After the chaos, the medical union began to clear up the wounded. That was the first time I saw a colored soldier. I watched as they brought all the wounded to that big house and laid them in the yard. Ambulances were coming and going to get the wounded and take them to the hospital at the Episcopal Church. Later that day, Rebecca's daughter and I went down the hill with our wooden buckets to fetch water. As we passed by the wounded, we offered them a drink. I helped one of the soldiers sit up a little so that he could drink. He grasped my hand real tight and he tried to speak, and I leaned in close. He spoke a few words that I couldn't make out. He was dying, and I stayed with him until he drew his last breath. No one should ever die alone. The front of my apron was covered in his blood. I never experienced anything so ugly and intimate in my life. Most of the Yankees had retreated near Newtown when the rebels took Belle Grove. General Sheridan was returning from a trip to Washington. He had not been at Belle Grove that morning. When Sheridan saw his battle-weary troops, he commanded the men to turn around. The cavalry was coming. As the troops saw their fearless leader gallantly charging toward them, they were inspired and rallied themselves once more. General Sheridan planned a successful counterattack, and he encouraged the morale of his men, telling them to give old Jubal the worst licking he ever had. Around 4 p.m., we heard a stampede of horses coming down the pike. A Yankee soldier confirmed that General Sheridan and his cavalry was coming back. The rebels had been caught unaware. This time, we all had time to take shelter here in the big house, in this very room. Some folks were sitting in the corners. Rebecca was reading the good book, proclaiming, "God's judgment has come." We didn't try to calm her down this time because we was all thinking the same thing. Some of the wounded were still laying in the yard when the Yankees returned. We could hear their groans even as the battle was going on. I didn't feel much like keeping still, so I just spent my time walking from one door to the next, peeking out. While Jubal Early relied on his infantry, Sheridan and his cavalry fought the war from horseback. Sheridan's cavalry cut down the rebel infantry, wielding their sabers with vengeance. We stayed here until we heard the rebels retreating. When we went out the door, we saw the rebels running toward the pike with the cavalry charging after them, slashing them with their swords. On my way back to my cabin, I felt droplets of what I thought was rain. There were a great many shade trees in the yard, and as I passed by them, I held out my hand to catch a few drops of rain. But with a closer look, it wasn't raindrops falling from the trees. It was blood. The Yankees returned to the cabin the next night, and we all tried our best to sleep. But good Lord, who could sleep? We didn't know what was going to happen next, so we all sat up that night to hear if anything was stirring about. The next morning, the wounded was all gone, and I wish I could say that the troubles in the valley was over, but there was more to come. The Union Army had destroyed most of the valley's infrastructure. The telegraph office, the newspaper, the post office, everything had been destroyed. There was no communication in or out of this valley. We never knew what was going on. We would hear a heap of things. Some would say one thing and some another. We never knew for sure. But once General Sheridan got here, we always heard the officers talking about what was going on. And there had been a band of brutish rebels around here, led by General John Singleton Mosby. They called him the Gray Ghost, 'cause he would sneak through Union lines and wreak havoc on the Yankees. General Mosby and his raiders was something to be feared. They ambushed, raided, and destroyed Yankee supply lines. General Mosby and his fighting men were lightning fast. They used 2 pistols, one in each hand. Some of the Yankee cavalrymen would say they'd rather charge into battle than to patrol the valley, fearing being ambushed by Mosby and his raiders. General Ulysses S. Grant, anxious to see this war come to an end, gave General Sheridan harsh orders to scourge this green valley. Civilians and their homes were now considered targets. General Sheridan had a solution for Mosby and his raiders. Sheridan's answer was an equally ruthless general by the name of George Armstrong Custer. General Custer had led one of the cavalry units here at Belle Grove during Sheridan's victorious counterattack. General Custer sure was a sight to see. He was tall and thin. He wore a big sombrero with a feather in the cap. He was always dressed in a velvet military jacket with gold braiding on the sleeves and a distinctive red necktie. With his long golden hair cascading down his shoulders and his baby blue eyes, he looked more like a prince in a fairy tale novel than a military general. But like Sheridan, Custer was a seasoned, fierce, hard combat fighting general. And most importantly, he was the right kind of crazy to defeat Mosby and his raiders. While Sheridan pursued Jubal Early, burning his way through the valley, Custer pursued his orders with a special vengeance. From Winchester down to Waynesboro, Custer went about burning random homes, carried off livestock, destroyed crops, wheat, corn, granaries, factories, mills, and barns. The timing of these raids garnered much criticism. It was harvest time, and with all the crops destroyed, many of the citizens simply starved to death. Bridges would be destroyed and railroad tracks ripped apart. If there were any slaves still on a place, they would be rounded up and repatriated elsewhere. I would see wagon after wagon of scared Negroes being taken to God knows where. Some say that the North was no longer taking refugees. Northern cities could no longer support the steady influx of Southern migration. Some say that they were taken to Costa Rica or Haiti, where they ended up working on some sugar plantation. Some say they were sent down south to help with the Reconstruction. No one really knows what happened to them. After General Custer destroyed all that was useful in our Green Valley, he joined General Sheridan in Charlottesville. Sheridan and Custer raided their way south, destroying the James River Canal before joining General Grant and General George Meade near Petersburg. General Grant planned an offensive that would bring General Robert E. Lee to his knees. In January 1865, President Lincoln was reelected. We sat in this kitchen and listened to Rebecca as she read from President Lincoln's second inaugural address. And she quoted, "Yet if God wills that this war continue until all the wealth be recompensed earned by the unrequited toil of slaves these 250 years, and until every drop of blood drawn by the master's whip is paid by another drawn by the sword, then the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. There was no doubt in our mind that this was God's war, and we prayed for his mercy. By March 1865, we at Belle Grove had lived through 4 bloody years of war. We were exhausted. We had reached our limits. Our souls were tired. Winchester had changed hands 72 times as major battles were fought in and around this vicinity. The war had laid waste to our green valley. The constant trampling of armies turned our rolling green hills to mud. Our rations were nearly gone, and we all wondered how much more of this could we take. On March 29, 1865, the Union Army broke General Lee's defenses at Petersburg and cut off the supply lines to the Confederate capital of Richmond. Grant's army dealt rebels a final blow at Sailor's Creek, where over 7,000 men lost their lives. General Lee, now cornered near Appomattox, short of supplies, exhausted, starving, and considerably outnumbered, surrendered the Confederate Army to General Grant on April 9, 1865. The war was over. When we got the news, it took me a good 10 minutes to pack my belongings. Oh, the world felt like it was brand new. Frank and I were married. We stayed with Pa and his kinfolk until we found a place of our own, right here in our green valley. The post-war attitude towards us was quite hostile, but we survived until we were able to thrive. Rebecca moved in with her grown son, and they lived in Warren County with him and his family. We would often write and visit one another on occasion. We would remain good friends throughout our lives. She lived a captivating life full of hardship, courage, and virtue. I will always admire my friend, not only for her bravery, but for her kindness. She was indeed my sister and my friend. In total, the war left over 6,200,000 people dead and an undetermined number of civilian casualties, making the Civil War the deadliest military conflict in American history. When I think about it, it is truly a miracle how we survived it all. Every time I pass Belle Grove, I think about what took place here. And I think Abe Lincoln said it best. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men who struggled here, who died here, have consecrated it. It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought so nobly advanced. It is for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion, that we highly resolve that these dead shall have not died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Amen. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Does anyone have any questions?
I was struck by your use of the word employer early on and throughout. Is that
Um,
design?
being bound, she could leave and go other places, but she also would refer to, Mr. Cooley as Master Cooley. Yeah, but she was free, but she was, in a bound situation.
Do you want to explain the source of your information about Lucy Walker? That might help.
Yes, Battleground Adventures. That was written, interviews that were taken about 1913. And Lucy Walker was one of the people who were interviewed, and also my great-great-grandfather, Abe Spencer, daughter, Serena Spencer, she was interviewed. She was about 73 at that time, and Lucy Walker, I'm sure, was probably about the same age. And these were accounts that she gave, but I also did a lot of research as I listed the names of all the free people of color that I looked up, and it was important to me to name them. It was a large number that, since this is a small community, there wasn't a black section of town. Everybody lived together. And so it was important for me to list their names and also to talk about her mother, Hester, who was sold. I did manage to find her up until 1870 in New Orleans. She was a washwoman for a family, and then I lost her after 1870.
Yes, some of the names
Mm-hmm.
that you call are in South Carolina as well. Coleman, Spencer's,
Mm-hmm.
James. Was that his first name or last name?
Let's see, which name?
You said James?
Yes, let's see.
What was his
There is the Colemans.
Coleman's as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
They're Coleman's in South Carolina.
Okay. James Nickens.
Oh, his first name was James.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, not him. But definitely the Coleman, Spencers, and some other names you call.
Okay.
First name in South Cooley's. There's a Cooley in South Carolina.
Okay.
One there. Well, yeah. So how did she get her freedom? I may have missed.
Her father was free. The Robinsons, I was able to trace them to the maybe mid to late 1700s. They generation after generation, and I think, and I mentioned like in 1806 there was a law set that if you were a free person of color set free after that time, you had to leave Virginia. So most of these people were probably descendants of people set free prior to that. And I know my ancestors, the Spencers, were set free the late 1700s, like 1790 something. And so, but you have a very large population, because these are just family names, so counting children and entire households. So I just looking at the census, and I went through that particular year, 1860, and calculated, I want to say at least 40% of the population of Middletown. Yeah, it was a very large free African American community here.
Miss Mills,
Mm-hmm.
who was the author of the book? You say is Clifton Johnson.
Yes, Clifton Johnson.
Now, who is he?
He was, I think, just a journalist.
A journalist?
Yes.
Living in Middletown? Does he
Uh,
have any connection with Middletown and Belle
I
Grove?
don't think so, because he went throughout, he has interviews for all the areas where the battles were fought.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
think wasn't he in DC?
I'm not sure. Yep, I'm not sure. I haven't looked him up. Yeah.
He lived where? In D.C.?
That sticks in my head for some reason. I
Okay.
may not be right on that.
Yep,
but-
there's a possibility. Yep.
So this tale that he wrote about Miss Walker was one of several that he would have done about other
Yes.
places and other people?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I've never heard.
And I think hers probably was like 3 paragraphs, and I just kind of fleshed it out. Yes.
Did a lot of fleshing out.
Yes, yeah. Just kind of bring her to life. Yeah, her and Rebecca. Yeah.
Great.
So we who, at Belle Grove, have always been fascinated by the story, especially because the opening line of her testimony is, I was found out I was never a slave.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always sort of struck us as curious, and one of our volunteer researchers, Jess Pritchett Ritter, I don't know why no one had done it sooner, set out to take any details from the story about where she said she lived, and to look into the census records to see who may have been living near here at a time when Mr. Johnson did his interviews that might fit that description, and that's how we settled on Lucy Walker as being that person's name. So we have more about, we have an online exhibit at Virtual Belle Grove, and I have a flyer here if you want to take it, that talks about some of the data that we know about the 2 women. But I think there's nothing like putting in a first person account to
Yes.
bring it to life.
Yes.
So you wrote this.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Absolutely
Thank
brilliant.
you. Thank you.
Makes it a lot. Makes it better.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Like you're there.
Thank you.
So how many times have you performed before an audience?
This is my third time.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Are you an actress?
No.
Yes.
Been a historian. Yes.
A professionally trained actress, I mean, because when you're reading it.
Oh,
it seemed to
wonderful,
me as
wonderful.
though you were so near.
Oh, it's a passion. I love history and family history, and just think it's a beautiful thing to share. And this was real. It's not fiction. It was real life. And as I was studying it, and I think probably since July, everything has been about the Civil War for me. So I watched Gone with the Wind and everything I could, just eat and drink and sleep the Civil War, and just, what life would have been like as a bound person and have a relationship and with Rebecca. And, this is what I came up with. Mm-hmm.
So your third time, the first 2 times were?
Would be my great-grandmother's account. She lived not too far from here. She right across the street from the Episcopal Church. That was the hospital. And so I've done that 3 times. I've done that one 3 times. And this one, so 4 times I've done the readings.
Is this something you would take on the road?
I would. I think it's important enough. Yeah.
Where do you live?
In Gore.
In Gore?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're from this area?
Yep,
Yeah,
yep, it's my
I know you-
cousins, yeah.
Oh, you're
Mm-hmm. Yes,
They
yes,
have to
yeah.
be very proud of you.
Oh, amen, thank you, yes.
Have you ever thought about, I know what Joe is thinking.
Yeah.
I know exactly what he's thinking. Watch out, you might be hearing from him.
Okay.
Have you ever thought about putting period costume on the stage?
I would love that. I was just trying to find something, I thought about it. I couldn't get a costume together. Was looking on Amazon. And so I would probably need some help to, to put it together. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
the subtleties
good.
and stuff, even at the reenactments, you could find some.
Yes. Yeah.
Or online.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. I wouldn't mind doing that.
There's a lady who helps run the Strasburg Emporium, and that's what she does. She
Okay.
does costumes.
Oh, okay.
Also, we had the honor of when you read the story. So your great-grandmother, when you were
Yes.
the 9-year-old.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so she actually becomes a 9-year-old child. It's amazing.
Well, my wife says I act like I'm 7.
That may be less amazing.
And I thought I'd put, just a lot of emphasis on the military aspect of it, like how many soldiers being here. Like that must have been, just amazing to look out and see 32,000 soldiers in the yard, and yes, and how bloody, like I know our bullets today can do some damage, but those, muskets this big, I mean, they just,
And the cannon.
tear a body apart, and, it
And the
was,
cannon.
yes, and the cannons, I mean, just, the bloodiness of the battle, and, I think that's really important to emphasize that, they saw things that would, they would never forget.
So,
Yeah.
something to think about
Mm-hmm.
is the one that was sold to New Orleans.
Yes.
We can assume what profession she was sold there for.
Probably prostitution. Mm-hmm.
We're on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you also bring out the disease that took so many soldiers.
Yes.
Like Rebecca's husband
Mm-hmm.
and the dysentery. And,
Yeah.
that was also pretty horrific for
Yes.
those young men.
Yes. Yes.
Starvation.
Yeah, starvation. And that's why the Confederate Army, when they got a chance, they, just plundered the camp. They were hungry, many barefoot. They would, if they saw a coat or some shoes, or a pair of pants, they were, both sides were, pretty worn out by 1864.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So listening to you, and then listening to our archaeologists earlier today, when I kind of gave you the third degree, it's amazing how you could take so little and create what you create, just as our archaeologists can, as she said, add meat to the bone, add
Mhm.
substance
Yes.
to all that. So it's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I just love the opportunity. So thank you. Yes. And as I was writing it, I just wrote it as how I would have experienced it. Just like there's a part in the story about, the blood, thinking it was rain, but just thinking how much blood was everywhere, and, trees, and, it was just probably a very gory scene for a long time,
When you wrote it, did you have to do a number of drafts, or did it sort of just flow right away? Or
Yep, a number of drafts, maybe one or two, but it flowed very easy, and I'm up in the mountains, kind of live by myself, and so I could really just get into what it would be like if I was Lucy, and this is how, you know, I experienced life and the soldiers and the inconvenience, you know, just, and so it was easy for me. Yeah.
Sounds like a gift.
Oh,
It
thank
is.
you, thank you, thank you,
Very well done.
thank
The
you.
writing and the delivery
Oh, thank
are
you,
all very good.
thank
Yeah,
you.
Yes, it's
absolutely.
amazing.
And it was important to me to not romanticize the relationship between Lucy and Rebecca, but still bring some humanity. Like Lucy would have had some harsh relationships with her employers, but with Rebecca, she found some softness because Rebecca had some miseries, and so they were able to, you know, bond together. And then, of course, you know, war brings people together, but they already had mutual admiration for each other, I believe. And so I wrote it with that. That's how I pictured Rebecca. That's how I saw her. You know, I don't know, but that's how I see her. Yeah. And then I did read that this home could have been a stop on the Underground Railroad, and just trying to piece that together, like during that time, how would that look? How would that work? Yeah. And it's, you know, I did map that out. It would have been a 10-day walk from here to Pittsburgh, with help along the way. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
During the period when she would have been living here, there was a murder at Belle Grove,
Mm-hmm.
and a black woman was convicted of killing a black woman.
Mm-hmm.
But your elderly version of her doesn't even mention that in her reminiscences.
I
Could you
was
say
going-
why you decided to leave
I
that
was
out?
going to, but then I said, well, you know, why talk about something so gory that we don't know all the details? But when I was investigating, the woman's name was Harriet Robinson. And I found a Harriet Robinson, I don't know if it's the same person, who could have been related to Lewis. And I said, let me leave that alone. But then I was like, well, you know, would they have let him stay or let Lucy stay if, you know, if this is the right Harriet, if they were really related, you know? So I don't know, but it is, legend says that she was expecting, it could have been, you know, Mr. Cooley's child. This could have been his mistress, and he could have helped her get away. And so, you
Well,
know.
she was expecting, that's more than legend.
Yes,
Established.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Who's the father? Who's the
Yeah. And because he tolerated the, you know, goings on, that he, you know, kind of might have had a hand in certain things. So I said, let me stop there. I won't include that. But I was thinking, was she related to Lewis? So that could have been. Yeah.
Yeah, that has us thinking too.
Mhm.
Robinson family.
Yeah, yep, I think they could have been. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a Mundy Robinson who lived
Yes,
in the area.
yes.
Who had a large family.
Yep.
He had
Mm-hmm.
I believe he had a daughter named Harriet.
Harriet.
But the age doesn't fit with the Harriet who was here.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm wondering if she was related to the
But she could
family.
have been related
Yeah.
distantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think some of the Robinsons were also enslaved at Glen Burnie. I don't know that for a fact, but there's a woman, for those who may not be familiar, the museum in Shenandoah Valley, Glen Burnie was owned by the Wood family, the founders of Winchester. There was a woman who successfully sued for her freedom in the 18-teens. It's a long series of events, and she overcame a lot. But in a couple of years afterwards, her older son, the overseers of the poor bind him out. And she makes a suggestion of binding him to a free black man named Charles Robinson. And in the same will where she is free, there's also a Charles, who could have been her brother, cousin, maybe even her husband. So I suspect the Robinsons might have also been enslaved at Glen Burnie. So that
Could be.
the Woods have connections to the Heights.
Mm-hmm.
It would all fit.
Mundy Robinson was a free black
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
And another thing about the African American community, a lot of times they will name their kids after a brother or sister,
Mhm.
nicknames.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So those names carry on down the line.
Yes.
Makes research difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or easy sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you gotta know what generation you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's special that you gotta do it in this space
Yes.
where actually
Yes.
the people were here, these windows, that battle was going out outside.
Yes.
And you tell this story, I can almost see you walking from corner.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Yes.
really neat
Yes.
to be able
Yep.
to
Thank you,
take the
Kristen.
environment and
Yes.
listen to your story.
Yes. Yes. So thank you again, Kristen, for this opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
We did too.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.